that the concerns we had at the start of the year for climate change has waned. We did have this spike of concern because of the bushfires. Are you guys sensing a change in sentiment where people are determined to start saving money again and start getting back on track? Rita?
Look, I think this issue always comes down to the dollars and cents. If you give people the option of having a greener source of energy, or whether you're, say, going on a flight and you can offset your carbon emissions, you give them that option. Once they've got to actually pay for it out of their own pocket, their sentiments change very quickly. So I think it can be quite misleading to have this polling about, you know, do you back zero emissions or do you want to have more sources of renewable energy? Because it all comes down to whether you want it enough that you're going to put your hand in your pocket and pay for it. And that's where this whole argument falls apart. And I think overwhelmingly Australians still put pricing above emissions. So cheap, reliable energy is still what they want most. And if it's green, renewable, whatever you want to call it, then that's a bonus. But, I mean, you do have people whose priority is emissions and they may be willing to pay that premium price, but most people aren't. And, you know, we've had those Qantas offset credits there for quite a while, and a very small percentage of people actually tick that box and pay a few dollars extra on their flight. And the same goes for energy. You can actually opt for some green providers that have got a bigger percentage of renewables in the mix. And a lot of people don't do that. And I think we've got to be a lot more honest and transparent about the cost of things, because it is very confusing when there's so many government subsidies that are in the system. So a lot of people think renewables are definitely cheaper because sun and wind, it's all free, it's there. But they don't understand the amount of taxpayer funds that have gone into that renewable sector.
Not to mention the baseload power from primarily coal that is required to build these, you know, giant windmills. I want to move on. There was a story broke about an hour and a half ago. Donald Trump has awarded Scott Morrison a top military honour. It's called the Legion of Merit for our Prime Minister's leadership in addressing global challenges. He was one of 3 leaders to receive the award after striking up a fairly close relationship with Donald Trump, alongside former Japanese Prime Minister and the Indian leader as well. Corin, that's a meaningful thing. I thought when he congratulated Joe Biden, I thought the Prime Minister might have cut his ties with Donald Trump, but not so.
No, it doesn't look that way, does it? But, you know, can't you already hear the screeching? This is just an opportunity for all of the ferals on Twitter to wheel out their hashtag Scotty from marketing, isn't it? And just play this whole game that he was always far too close in his relationship with Donald Trump, and he betrayed the country, and he's no leader, all of the other rubbish that you see, just swishing around in the cesspit of Twitter. That's really, you know, it's setting him up for more woe.
I think it's also an indication that the Americans, even the outgoing president, values the Answers relationship, because it is so important. We have been in every theatre of war with the Americans, and we shouldn't underestimate that. I want to go to the COVID virus and also the cluster in northern Sydney at the moment. Rita, even the New South Wales Premier was knocked over today because we had a massive 44,000 tests in one, I think you work it out, it's about a 12-hour period, not 24 hours. With only 8 infections, it is trending down fast. We've got to touch wood. We've got to not count our chickens too fast because it could get up to 30 tomorrow, who knows. But it is an example of how you can balance both, unlike so many other premiers, and at the same time you don't need to say, we're going to put you in a paddy wagon if you don't wear a mask.
No, I think Gladys has remained the gold standard. The New South Wales has shown that you don't need to panic. You don't need to do what other states have done. Remember, about a month ago, South Australia going into that ridiculous lockdown based on false information, and you know, the whole thing was just hysterical based on a couple of infections.
Yep.
So New South Wales has handled these sort of clusters before. Remember that Thai cluster, the Thai restaurant cluster? That was over 140, 150, if I remember correctly. And again, they did not panic. They trusted that the contact tracing would contain and they would be able to successfully trace those infected and contain it, that without having to impose a draconian lockdown that is going to cause all sorts of other complications for people. So I really applaud her for keeping her head, because there was so much pressure from the other premiers, and of course they've all gone ahead and closed their borders to New South Wales, but we've gone from 30 to 15 to 8 today, and the last 2 days have been record numbers of tests. So it's not like the 8's coming from a small number of tests. So I think this is the way to approach it. It's a way to have a cure that's not worse than the disease. So you're not punishing everybody in the state, you're not damaging people's livelihoods, but still you're keeping people safe and containing the virus by having a competent contact tracing program.
Yeah. Corin, Gladys Berejiklian had a dig at the other states for what they have done in terms of borders up again, and she wanted them to consider reopening on compassionate grounds. I think I've got the grab of Gladys saying that a little earlier today.
My frustration at various stages of the pandemic with my other colleagues in other states is please consider the compassionate grounds, and there are parts of New South Wales completely unaffected by this current outbreak, and yet everybody in New South Wales is suffering because other state leaders have made decisions.
Corin, the other states, most of them are going for some kind of elimination strategy. So their point is, no, we don't want one single infection. They've got the best hospital system in the world in every state. They should be able to control and share the wear when it comes to infections. It's not about elimination. You've got to be compassionate, as Gladys Berejiklian pointed out today.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've been critical of Gladys Berejiklian on some issues this year, but on this issue, her, alongside her government and New South Wales Health, have been absolutely, as Rita said, gold standard. You know, New South Wales is doing the bulk of the heavy lifting when it comes to returning travellers. She's got every right in this instance to come down hard on the other premiers. They're like ineffectual leaders who aren't managing situations well, and New South Wales is left to pick up the pieces. You know, there's lots of people out there again screeching, return Aussies home, return our people home. Well, where do they go to? The majority are going to New South Wales by far. So she's got every right here, because you've got the hysterical maniacs like we see over in WA. It's just, thank goodness for Berejiklian's level head.
Yeah, very true. The federal government, Rita, is intent on keeping secret the report into the departure of Oz Post boss Christine Holgate over their Cartier watch rewards. Does that tell us that the PM may have overreacted and what she was doing was actually in keeping with her commission ability, the ability to give people either watches or rewards monetarily for doing great jobs?
It may be a sign that it's not in the government's interest to have that report released. I thought the whole incident was a bit of a storm in a teacup. It's sort of, it got people excited because you're talking about a luxury brand being, handed out as a gift to what is in a government agency. But I mean, that happens, and I'm far more concerned about why the Australia Post CEO, whoever it is, and it's certainly her predecessor, was getting a salary that was significantly higher, many times higher than the person doing the equivalent job in the US, which has got a postal service that's 300 odd million people that are servicing. So I was like, how does that work? How can they be paid a fraction of what our Auspost chief is being paid? Yeah, so the whole Cartier watches thing to me was a bit of a storm in a teacup.
Yes, he got cranky when
Can I just say, though...
So, go on.
Sorry, Chris. Just to say on that Paul Fletcher gave an interview with the ABC in November where he said that the report findings would be made public in due course. That, I think, is the sticking point for me. We should not let this go.
Yeah.
If you've come out and publicly said that the report findings will be made public themselves, then you have to honour that. Otherwise, all of those key things about transparency, account, it doesn't pass the pub test to me, and I think questions need to be asked. Why has that decision been revoked?